Okay, I think we're ready to get started.
I'll let Paul introduce himself. This will do a far better job than I will, and I think we've got a pretty familiar crowd here. So Paul is our own RCA board member, and he's got a great topic today of a brief history of nature study. And make sure afterwards you take a look at these fantastic books. These are pretty cool. So he'll explain more about the name tags and why he wants you to
near the end I'll
be suited up. So but thank you for coming. It's a beautiful day, and we're glad people here, because I know everybody's like, I've been waiting for that sun. So
yeah, I know. So yes, thank you for being here instead of out there right now. I know it's a real struggle. Even my wife is struggling with that. So all right. So thank you for coming. The nature study is a passion for me. I've been doing it all my life, and I really enjoy it. For most of you, I assume it's the same thing. That's why you're here. You enjoy nature, and you like being out there. I think you also understand the benefits of nature study, that piques your curiosity, the new knowledge, and the healthier mind and body that you can get from being out in nature. The nature study program that I'm going to talk about is a progressive educational movement that actually started in the late 1800s, called the Nature Study Movement. It originated at the College of Agriculture at Cornell and actually spread across the country and internationally as well. Two of the leading voices in the movement of the nature study movement is one gentleman named Liberty Hyde Bailey, and the other is Anna Botsford Comstock. And we'll hear more about them as we go along, but they are the two main people that got it going. A major tenet of the nature study program was to lead children, rural and urban, outdoors, using nature as the inspiration for their daily lessons. The teaching was informal and loosely structured. At the time, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, were about the only things kids got in school. They didn't have music, they didn't have art, they didn't even have geography. It was basically the 3 R's, and that's what they were learning. There are many people and related events that I will not cover in order to keep this brief history brief. And if there's any questions along the line, I'd ask that you save them for the end, again, to keep this brief. Thank you. So we take a look at some of these terms that you see up on the board here. Last Child in the Woods is a book written about how kids don't get outside anymore. They're inside with screens or other things like that, and they're just not getting outside. And that is true. We see less and less of kids being outside. Forest bathing is an activity in Japan where it's kind of immersing yourself in the forest. It's kind of like the next one down, mindfulness and meditative in nature. So, and actually we did one of these programs out here, I think, taking a walk at Rice Creek. So these are all things involved with nature. The next one, the self-transcendence, is, well, I'll explain that right now. It refers to the ability to see someone in the world from a broader perspective, and adopting a larger perspective that includes concern for others and nature. And that was actually one of the goals of the nature study movement, but it wasn't really pushed. But Liberty Bailey really wanted that to be involved as well. And some of you may have experienced it already, this self-transcendence, where you are now more concerned not just with your own being, but others and the world around you, including the natural world. So nature study is not natural history. I have one natural history book up here, and the rest are all nature study books, and you can see the difference. Natural history texts are great at providing details, descriptions, habitats, and the organism's place in the ecological setting, but they're not the nature study. So the brief history of the nature study we're going on, nature may be studied with either two objectives. And this is coming from Liberty Hyde Bailey, the gentleman who actually got the whole thing going. He says, discover the new truth for the purpose of increasing the sum of human knowledge. So just getting knowledge. And every one of you, when you get something new, you have done it for the all human knowledge. If you got one thing new and nobody else did, you did it for all human knowledge. So you have it. Or to put the pupil in a sympathetic attitude towards nature for the purpose of increasing their joy of living. And that's what I think a lot of us do. And they talk about pupils and kids, but it's the same thing for the adults as well. Liberty Hyde Bailey strongly believed that by engaging with nature, especially at an early age, the individual would be a better citizen as well as living a healthier life. This is Anna Botsford Comstock. She is equally important as the Liberty Hyde Bailey is in the movement, the nature study movement. Bailey put her in charge of organizing and running the nature study program. He was assigned to take care of it, oversee it, and he put her in charge of actually implementing the whole program. And so she says there, nature study is for the comprehension of the individual life of the bird, insect, or plant that is nearest at hand. So we're going to take a look at some of the early history of nature study. The movement I'm talking about, the nature study movement, actually didn't come about until the late 1800s, early 1900s. But people were studying nature prior to that, but not in such a formal way. So we take a look at the slide here and we see it, sometime nature study was a necessity. You had to have food, you had to have clothing. So that was, people had to know nature and understand what the animals were doing, what the plants were doing. And so they learned it on their own. Then we take a huge jump up to the Greeks in Roman time. Aristotle, he was a Greek philosopher. Nature study didn't start with the Greeks, but they provided some of the earliest records. Aristotle spent a great deal of time examining the natural world. He wanted to know why things were the way they were. And then we have the Greeks and Romans again here. Now we're up to the Romans and early Roman Empire, Pliny the Elder. He was understood that natural history is covering anything that can be found in the world. And he actually wrote a book about it called Natural History. So now we're moving up a little further ahead in time. As you look at the top piece there, we're trying to do a timeline this way. And so during the Middle Ages, science was heavily intertwined with religious beliefs. Viewing the nature world was a reflection of God's creation and order. Scholars often drew on classical texts. For example, portions of Pliny's text that I just showed you were actually discovered during the Middle Ages. And somebody actually during that time in 1430 actually found a full copy of his book and actually got it printed. Paracelsus developed what's called the doctrine of signatures. This concept is about taking a look at something, plant or an animal, primarily plants, and looking at it and seeing if it has any features that look like human features. For example, this is the plant Hepaticus, all right, and Hepaticus is one of these plants that people would take and either make a food out of it or tea or something like that because they thought it helped the liver. The lobes of the leaves look like liver lobes, so they thought this would help cure anything for the liver. Another example is walnuts in the brain. If you look at a walnut, it looks like the wrinkled brain, and so people were eating walnuts thinking it would help their brain. Lucky for them, recent science does show that eating walnuts does great things for your brains in many ways. So they weren't off the mark on that one. But a lot of the other things were kind of questionable. So moving up a little further in time, we take a look at birds hibernated underwater or flew to the moon and wintered there. This is what people were believing during this time. All right, we didn't have much research going on to actually explain what was going on. People just started to look around and see what was around them. When people began to believe birds migrated, they thought larger birds would carry the smaller ones on their back. Now we're getting into some nature study influencers. We hear about influencers all the time now, whether it's on YouTube or TikTok or something like that. So these are our nature influencers. There's many more of them that were involved, but again, trying to keep it short. I just picked a few, and we're going to just briefly talk about some of them. So the first one here, John Bartram, all right, he was an American botanist, horticulturist, and explorer. Bartram actually traveled to Oswego here in July of 1743. At that time, he described the area as having a small settlement and a fort. He also noticed that the Native American tribes here used a flower called bee balm, which is over there, as you can see that. And he saw that flower and realized that the Native Americans were actually calling bee balm Oswego tea. Or he came up with the name Oswego tea. He coined it, saw him using bee balm, and he started using it, and he called it Oswego tea. After the Boston Tea Party, Oswego tea was widely used to replace the expensive and imported tax tea. So it got around quite a bit. The name got around quite a bit as well, Oswego tea. Carl Linnaeus, the gentleman down on the right-hand corner, was a medical doctor, a degree from Holland, and was made a director of a large botanical gardens. He published a book called The System of Nature, developing a system of scientific nomenclature, which include genus and species, that quickly became accepted around the world. So through his work, he's studying nature, he's actually giving names to nature. And this helped tremendously. For example, Oswego tea is in the genus Mernada, and other common names include bergamot, bee balm, horsemint, and Oswego tea. These are all the same names for the same plant, but this guy was able to actually come up with a two-name system to describe every plant that you could possibly find. And that way, everybody, you could, if you're talking about Oswego tea, like I do on some of the Facebook pages I'm on, I'll put down the actual scientific name, because I got people who are not familiar with Oswego. They're over in another country or another state, and so they wouldn't know what Oswego tea is. If you put down the scientific name, then they know what you're talking about. So that was a great contribution to science right there. Then we have a gentleman named Gilbert White. He was an English naturalist who recorded the daily observations of nature in a book called The Natural History of Selborne. His recordings of nature influenced Charles Darwin. All he did was just look out his window or go on a walk and write notes about what he saw all the time, but he kept very nice detailed records, dates and times and things like that. The next man is William Bartram. He is actually the son of John Bartram, the guy who coined the Oswego tea. William's writings are widely recognized as 18th century, as an 18th century precursor to the environmental movement. His books gave vivid descriptions of the flora and fauna that was easy for the everyday person to read and understand. So this is where nature's starting to get in the hands of other people. They are reading it, they are learning more about it. He was best known for his books about his expeditions in southeastern North America. John James Audubon, naturalist or ornithologist. He's most famous for his Birds of America. Audubon's education was that of a well-to-do upper-class individual. He was instructed in mathematics, geography, music, and fencing, which are typical kids would not be getting in those days. Remember, they were getting the basic 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. He was not the first person to attempt to paint and describe all the birds of America. Alexander Wilson was that person who did that. But for half a century, Audubon was the dominant wildlife artist. He made a significant contribution to the understanding of bird anatomy and behavior through his field notes. His work, The Birds of America, is a collection of 435 life-size bird prints. And if you ever get a chance to get down to Cornell, they got several of them hanging in some of the buildings in Cornell, which are just beautiful to see. Some more nature study influences. Henry David Thoreau, naturalist, writer, and a transcendentalist. These, again, we talked about that term in the very beginning. These are people who actually look beyond themselves to start thinking more about the world in a greater span. So Thoreau's famous work, Walden, was about philosophy, work, leisure, self-reliance, individualism, and nature. He had several other books that he wrote as well, but that being his most famous. He studied at Harvard College and took courses including the classics, philosophy, mathematics, and natural history. He only took 2 science classes when he was at Harvard, one of them being natural history. Thoreau's writings are considered foundational to the modern environmental movement and ecology. And so you'll see a lot of these people were starting to inspire others to think about the environment in a greater perspective. Although he wasn't a scientist, many scholars have studied his writings on ecology. Thoreau followed the life philosophy called transcendentalism. Next is Charles Darwin. Darwin was an English naturalist, geologist, and biologist, widely known for his contributions to the evolutionary biology. Thing most people don't know is that Darwin didn't formally study biology. He actually took a that's spam coming in, sorry. He actually took another path. He studied medicine and then actually went into theology. He served on the HMS Beagle, the boat that went to the Galapagos Islands, where he made his major discoveries. He went as a naturalist on that boat, even though he was really a theologian, and he learned all his biology on his own. Evolution is generally accepted, talking about his theory, evolution is generally accepted and considered a fundamental scientific concept. Interesting, here in the United States, recent polls demonstrate that almost half, 40% of Americans do not accept the theory of evolution. As a biology teacher, I find that a little disturbing, but we'll go on. So now we're getting into a writer here, John Burroughs. He was a naturalist and a writer, again, not trained in any formal way, just learned it all on his own and finding books that would help explain things for him. Burroughs was a prolific writer of nature essays. He is considered the father of the nature essay. His writings appeared in popular magazines at the time. And if you look at the time, we're looking at 1837 when he was born to 1921. So he was right there in the middle of this whole nature study movement that we're going to get into a little more detail soon. He connected with city dwellers about nature. At this time, a lot of people were leaving the farms and moving into the cities to get factory work. And that became a huge problem, and one of the reasons why the whole nature study movement got put into place was farmers leaving the farms and moving to the cities. He was influenced by Walt Whitman, Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau. Famous people including Harvey Firestone, with Firestone Tires, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, John Muir, and Teddy Roosevelt visited with him and went camping with him. And I've seen pictures of them all hiking and camping around a fire pit all together. John Muir, we just mentioned him as well. He was a naturalist, glaciologist, and a writer. He was with John Burroughs. John Burroughs is on the right, and Muir is here on the left. Goes on to say he had a career as an industrial engineer until a factory accident nearly cost him his eyesight. Muir redirected his focus to the outdoors and exploring nature. In 1867, Muir walked 1,000 miles from Indiana to Florida. He visited Yosemite Valley and took a summer job there, operating a sawmill. While he was there, he studied Yosemite's glacial formations, the geological formations, correctly identifying that the glacial erosion created the area and not a catastrophic earthquake, which everybody had thought prior to his discovery. Muir helped start the Sierra Club in 1892, becoming its first president. Now, I have up here several books. Some of them are on the desk over here. During this time, so that we're talking the late 1800s already, John Burroughs doing his writing, Thoreau's writing things, and there's other writers out there. So it got very popular. The people wanted more books about nature, and so a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon and started writing books about nature. But a lot of people did not know their nature and just made it up as they went along. So the book on my left up here, this is by John Burroughs about squirrels, and everything he's talking about the squirrels is factual. It's true, it's factual. Then we have our other two books here, Mother's West Wind Animal Friends by Thornton Burgess and Mother Westwood Stories. Thornton Burgess tried to keep everything accurate as far as animals' behavior. The only thing he did a little different is that he made the animals talk and he put clothing on the animals. But their overall behavior still remained true to nature. The other gentleman over here, Wild Animals Have Known, Ernest Seton Thompson. He's been accused of not truly representing nature as it should be. In one episode, he's talking about a fox riding on the back of a wolf, and they said that's never really going to happen for our scientists looking at it. And so he got a little carried away in some of his stuff. But he was a very, very popular writer at the time. And then Secrets of the Woods over here by William Long. He also got discredited for writing things that were not accurate about nature at all. He just joined the bandwagon. Let's write some stories about nature, see if we can get some money from producing these books. So we're moving into a little more into the actual impetus of how the nature study movement got going. This gentleman, Louis Agassiz, Swiss-American naturalist, educator, biologist, geologist, right? He taught at Harvard and challenged the traditional method of teaching, which relied heavily on textbooks and memorization. And that is what actually made the nature study movement so popular, is that they did the same thing in the nature study movement. They moved away from textbooks and went to actual hands-on activities. He was known for his innovative approach to teaching, with emphasized direct observation and nature fieldwork. He greatly influenced the nature study movement's methods of teaching. He is the gentleman who coined the term field trip. When he was going on a field trip, they actually went into a field, took a trip into a field. I know it's Tim here. Tim took his classes on a field trip the other day to the zoo. Not exactly a field, but still a nice field trip to say. So the same gentleman, his teaching methods and work on glaciers and fossil fishes brought natural science to a wider audience. So this is a time when things are getting published. His articles are showing up in periodicals, and not just science journals and things like that. So this started sparking an interest in natural history and nature study. So they are two different things, nature and natural history. I have a natural history textbook up here, and then the rest are nature study books, and you can see the difference up there. In 1873, he established his first summer school of science with the primary goal of teaching teachers a method of nature study through hands-on observations. Little interesting fact about him, he is actually the gentleman who first described the megalodon, all right, which is a huge shark. He described it in 1835. It's regarded as one of the largest and most powerful predators who have ever lived. So he was I don't watch Shark Week, but I imagine this shows up every time in Shark Week or something like that, being the largest shark around. So this gentleman, Agassiz, also said that study nature, not books. And that was his whole thing. He kept saying, get out in nature, actually get in there, get involved and see what's going on that way. We have a couple pictures. This picture right in the center is actually some of our kids from our summer camp program, Exploring Nature. The nature study movement was in part a result of Agassiz's summer school of science, where he repeatedly said, study nature, not books. Doing my research, I did not know this when I first started, and I came across doing nature study, his name popped up. Edward Austin Sheldon. He was, I'll tell you a little bit about him if you don't know him, head of the Oswego Normal Training School. That's the teacher's school. He developed what's called the Oswego movement, or the Oswego, or the object method. He played a major role in the nature study movement through his practice and promotion of teaching method that emphasized hands-on discovery and learning. He entered the teaching profession with the eye on reforming and improving teacher training. Sheldon began as a superintendent of the Syracuse City Schools. Then he moved on to Oswego City Schools and eventually became the head of the Oswego Normal Training School. The Oswego movement object method was an American educational reform movement that contributed to formalizing teacher education. Prior to this, teachers were not really trained in anything. They kind of just said, I know something about this, I'll go and teach in a one-room schoolhouse and do that. Teacher training was not something that was very common at that time. Sheldon learned the object method from a Swiss educator named Johann Pestalozzi. All right, the teachers who had studied at Oswego obtained administrative and teaching positions around the country and the world, spreading the object method. In the object method, if you're wondering, the teacher would present the class with some material objects such as sugar cube, a glass, water, salt, cork, leather, or even a piece of lead. The teacher would then ask the students about the material and what do they see, what do they observe, and they had to try and give as much information as possible through direct observation. Later, the teacher would provide information about the materials that would normally come out of a textbook, but she's giving it to them verbally right there on the spot. In 1862, Sheldon invited educators from all over the country to observe the work at Oswego. Oswego became the leading teachers' college in the nation. So we jump over into some other influencers here. This gentleman, George Perkins Marsh, wrote a book called Man in Nature, and it's subtitled Physical Geography as Modified by Human Action. This was rather a groundbreaking book. He was not a scientist, not a sociologist or anything like that. He was actually a diplomat living in Italy, an American diplomat living in Italy, but he had a real interest in nature, especially forestry. And so he really studied a lot about the forest and things like that. So in his studies, when he was doing that, he realized that the book he wrote, he put this in the book challenges the myth of the inexhaustibility of the earth and the belief that human impact on the environment is negligible. People think we weren't impacting the earth at all, though we were clear cutting everything, taking all the forests down and damming rivers and things like that. He started seeing that this was trouble. He compared this to the ancient Mediterranean civilizations that collapsed through environmental degradation. And he said, we're doing the same thing here in America. We got to wake up, we got to look around. And so again, at the same time, people are getting interested in natural history and nature study. So people started reading his book and started paying attention to what he had to say. So here's where we actually start the nature study movement. All right, it's the late 1800s, early 1900s. There's an economic depression happening. Everybody's poor in the country. Farmers are looking for work, so they move into the cities where the factories are. Fewer farmers meant less food being produced. Because of this, it was believed by the politicians and educators that if farm children knew life's natural processes by studying nature, the children would maintain an interest in farming, trying to keep the kids back on the farm. In 1908, because this problem was so prevalent and causing so much trouble, that the President Theodore Roosevelt actually developed a commission called the Commission on Country Life. They had to do three things. They made three recommendations. nationalize extension service, like cooperative extension service, out to the farmers, helping the farmers more. Do scientific surveys on rural life. What is the actual life like for the people, not just the plants? And a creation of a national agency dedicated to rural progress, trying to improve what's going on in the world. Because the people are all leaving the farms, they're moving into the cities, life wasn't that great, trying to find housing and things like that became a big problem as well. So the commission then grants Cornell, an agricultural college at that time, Cornell $8,000 to study nature study and to put nature study programs in all the schools starting in New York. We're talking across the country starting in New York, and it started here at Cornell. All right, so Cornell receives that grant. And then Liberty Hyde Bailey was responsible for the new program. He was instantly put in charge and immediately appointed Anna Botsford Comstock to run the program. So a little bit about Liberty Hyde Bailey, very interesting guy. Born in Michigan to a pioneer family, as we see up here on the screen, became an expert on grafting trees. His family was very big in vegetables and fruits and vegetables. That's how they made their living. He also read Darwin's On the Origin of Species and Isaiah Gray's Field, Forest, and Garden Botany. When he was just a school child, he'd be walking to school, and his teacher actually liked him more than the other students in the class. And one day she said, when you're walking to school, what do you see? And I goes, oh, I see houses, I see farms, and maybe a few cows. She goes, no, I want you to really start looking and telling me what you're really seeing as you go along. I want you to take a look at that tree over by so-and-so's house and tell me what you see about that tree when you come back into class. And so she challenged him to look deeper and question him every day about what he saw. And he really enjoyed this and started learning a lot. His teacher was very good at nature study herself and started teaching more and more that way. So he had a real enthusiasm for nature. He was a respected ornithologist and entomologist. Entomologist is a person that studies insects. All right. And at the age of 20, he entered the Michigan Agricultural College. He flourished under the tutelage of Dr. William James Beal, who used a new experimental approach to teach botany, using living plants and laboratory work rather than only lectures and textbooks. So we're starting to see at this time, people are moving away from books. They want to get out and get hands-on experience, especially the teachers trying to encourage this. Beal, who was Bailey's major professor, would later recommend Bailey to be Gray's assistant at Harvard. Gray's the gentleman who wrote that big book about botany. And so Bailey's major teacher recommended him to work with Gray. Bailey coined the term cultivar, meaning cultivated varieties. And so I hear this term a lot, especially in a lot of the groups I'm with. Oh, that's only a cultivar. It's not truly a native plant. It's a cultivar. It's been developed from the original plant. So Bailey was actually a gentleman who coined that term. Goes on to say that farms were still struggling as more and more left for the factories and the city life. Bailey was well known nationally, trying to promote and improve the life of farmers. Bailey had government officials on a national level listening to him. Bailey built up support by providing bulletins, lectures, demonstrations, farming institutes, and even went to visit farmers at their homes. He listened to the farmers' problems and provided valuable solutions. More and more farmers realized the value of Cornell's extension program, so they extended that. Bailey became the director of Cornell, all right, at the program at that time. Bailey was instrumental in the development of 4-H clubs, which we still have today. If you go to Oswego County Fair, I did last summer, and they got a whole building devoted to the 4-H club, and these kids are doing marvelous things. All right. He also developed a cooperative extension system that we still have going on today. And two other things that he really did that most people don't know about is world electrification, bringing electricity out to the farms so they could do more work out there. And then the other thing he really did was developing the parcel post. This is bringing packages out to the rural areas to the farms. During the first 5 days of the service, over 4 million parcel post packages were delivered. Marketing through the parcel post gave rise to great mail order businesses. Think Amazon today, same idea. But before we had Amazon, we had Montgomery Ward catalogs. And if some of you grew up knowing some of those, originally started out as a one-page catalog in 1872. And then with the advent of the parcel post, the mail order became one of the most important books in the farmhouse, Montgomery Ward. It's second only to the Bible. In fact, the catalog was often called the homesteader's Bible. So they could get everything they need, the farmers, through parcel post because of Liberty Hyde Bailey's pushing for this to happen. Then we have Anna Botsford Comstock. She was the one I said that was put in charge. When New York State gave funding to Cornell to start a statewide nature study program in all the schools, Comstock was given the responsibility to oversee it. In addition to her nature study program in schools, Comstock took over the home nature study program. So they did it in schools. She did a program where it was a correspondence program where you mail things out to different people, the brochures and things like that. And it, excuse me, she was preparing monthly teachers' leaflets. She composed over 800 pages during the 7 years of doing this. And so we have some pictures of some publications here. Starting on the left is Country Life Movement in the United States. That's by Liberty Hyde Bailey. The middle one is called the Junior Naturalist Monthly. That was part of the nature study program by a guy named John Spencer. And then on the far right is Home Nature Study course that Comstock was in charge of. The Home Nature Study course materials form the basis for her most famous work, the 930-page Handbook of Nature Study, first published in 1911. It looked like this. And then today you can get it like this. Many of the stuff in it is still very valid. There are some things that are antiquated now, but a lot of it is still good. I have the book right over here. This is my copy right here, if you want to take a look at it. But that's all the leaflets that she was writing for the home correspondence course, all condensed into a book like that, Nature Study. The Handbook of Nature Study has gone through 25 editions, been translated into 8 languages, and is still in print. Anna was appointed as assistant professor of nature study in 1899's summer session at the college at Cornell. This was the first time a woman had been given the title of professor at Cornell University. Objections from certain board members, the trustees of the college, to having women professors, she was not reappointed because they objected to her being a professor. However, the president of the college liked her so much that he appointed her lecturer in nature study at the same salary. She didn't hold the title, but got the same salary. So I mentioned one guy, John Spencer, Uncle John, Junior Naturalist Club, Junior Gardens. His philosophy, he was all part of that with Comstock and Bailey. Start gardens. Let the kids grow gardens. This is at a school. Let the kids grow gardens at school. Understand what gardening is about. Get closer to the plants, the soil, and things like that. So John Walton Spencer was a prominent figure in the development of the agricultural and education in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He initiated the programs Junior Naturalists and Junior Gardeners for children in New York State. So the nature study movement was one of the precursors to the modern environmental movement. At its peak, the nature study movement went global. It actually was expanded to the Midwest and Southern states. It went global, being taught in the United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. Then the nature study movement starts to fade away around the 30s, 40s, and things like that. There are several reasons for fading away. The nature study movement declined in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries due to a combination of factors. The teaching method lost its popularity. It took a lot of work to be one of these hands-on teachers. If you've done it at all in any of your classes, you know hands-on requires a lot of work and patience. So the method and the other teachers being trained in it still didn't catch on to it and didn't do well with it. The next thing here would be, one second, I'm sorry. This formal science education. You see these textbooks up here, that's what they started moving to. Instead of doing something like Comstock's nature study book there, they went to more dry science text like this. And this is what we're still using today in many of our places. The science education became more formalized and standardized. Some educators and scientists viewed nature study as too informal, less scientific. This led to a push for more structured, laboratory-based science instruction. Criticism and sentimentality. Some of the male critics saw nature study as sentimental and overly focused on beauty, which undermined its reputation as a serious scientific discipline. This was further amplified by the association of nature study with women, who were often drawn to its often less formal and artistic aspects. World War II. The outbreak of World War II led to a shift in educational priorities, with greater emphasis placed on practical skills and subjects deemed relevant to the war effort. Nature study, while valuable, was seen as less directly applicable. Then we have the emergence of environmental education. While the nature study movement was a precursor to the modern environmental education, its methods and goals eventually evolved into more structured and science-based approaches. Technological advancements, the advent of more easily accessible and disposable digital resources in the 1900s and 2000s also shifted focus away from the traditional nature study methods. And that has a flip side to it. I know this technology also allows people to actually identify plants and birds and things a lot easier. You can put an app right on your phone, go up to a plant, press the button, and it'll tell you what the plant is. So that can actually work both ways. If the kids are just at home playing games on their screens all the time, that's probably to the detriment of nature study. But if they're actually going out with apps that can help identify things, that would be nice. So where's nature study today? It goes on to say the American Nature Study Society was America's oldest environmental education organization. It started in 1908 with Liberty Hyde Bailey as the first president. It became the leading organization serving the nature study movement. Although not as active in the past as it was in the past, the primary mission today is preserving its history and its various publications, including a publication called Nature Study. Homeschooling has taken over a lot of the nature study. I've worked with a few homeschooling groups, and I see it all the time. They're bringing kids on field trips all the time and doing nature study activities. If you go on to, if you just Google homeschooling nature study, you'll get all kinds of things, all kinds of books available for homeschooling. Why homeschooling? Well, it's less academic structure. You don't have all these classes rigid in 45-minute segments or something like that. More time, not locked in. Smaller class sizes, usually only have maybe 1 or 2 families working together. Hands-on learning, they're actually outside learning things, inside as well. They do hands-on activities all the time. And more field trips, actually getting out into fields and things like that and seeing what's going on. We have a lot of environmental organizations. New York State Outdoor Environmental Education Association. They're focused on outdoor education, nature study. Syracuse University Outdoor Education. Cortland's very famous for it as well. And then National Outdoor Leadership School. These are schools that actually, this group is training people to lead backpacking hikes in wilderness and things like that. Not all of these really focus that much on nature study, but they're out in the environment. They are learning about nature as they go along. And the last slide here is nature centers and backyards. And this is right here at our Exploring Nature program that we run in July. Rice Creek, we have a lot of nature exploring going here. Beaver Lake Nature Center, Sterling Nature Center, you know, and then even kids in their backyard playing in the mud and water like that. They're spending time like that. That's what we're seeing more of these days. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any, and if not, I'll tell you what we're doing with the name tags as soon as we're done. If anybody has.
Not necessarily a question, but when you talk about Firestone and Ford and Burroughs, you know, getting together and all, if anybody sees any of those pictures from that time that they took, they were all dressed formally. They were wearing suits and formal hats and everything. They went out to nature to work it, but they were dressed very
well dressed. Yes, absolutely.
The other point is Anna Boxford Comstock was married to John Comstock, who was also from Cornell, was a famous entomologist and one of the doctors. He came out with a number of publications of his own.
That's right. She was actually his student.
Yes, and I think she was also responsible for a number of diagrams and pictures that were in his book.
She did all of them. She studied wood cutting on her own in order to do the plates for his books. Yeah, very good. All right. Yes.
Well, we were just in West Virginia and we were at a state park, and in the visitor center they always have all these pamphlets and it's full of things to do. And there was a pamphlet on forest bathing. Actually, there was only 2 left. I kept them both. I was going to bring one today. I thought maybe it would be appropriate. I had no idea. And so
Yeah.
maybe it's spread, maybe the concept is spreading, or maybe it's just one person in West Virginia who was into it.
I think it's across the nation. There are, you know, depending on what part of the society you're with. I know people like yoga centers and stuff like this, or nature centers and like that. People that do try to connect more with their immediate environment are into doing things like that. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Talk us a little bit about how some of these historical figures viewed or incorporated perspectives of people of color.
Say that last part.
People of color.
Of color.
Or indigenous.
I didn't come across that, and I think it's probably that I'm only doing the brief part, and there is a lot more information about that, but I didn't come across anything regarding that.
There was some scandal about
Of course.
Oh, yes.
And Myrrh.
Yeah,
And
But
Myrrh
Walden
too.
was an abolitionist. And
yeah.
What about Myrrh? Oh, I don't want you to put you on the spot.
but Walden was an abolitionist. He talks a little bit about the previous black settlement.
Mhm. Yes, that's true. Yeah, I didn't include any of that. I didn't actually come across much of it at all if I saw it when I was doing it, but I'm sure it's all there too.
Also, the New York City Public Library has the whole book of Audubon's book.
Oh, really? All the
And
prints?
a lot of, like, the pages are taken apart, so you can see a lot of.
Yeah.
stuff.
It's beautiful work
It
to
is
see.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about sort of large view of humankind's involvement with nature. You know, obviously we are part of it, but we've gone a fur piece from being in it. And it seems like there's an ongoing struggle depending on where we are in sort of the development of human culture and occupations in trying to keep touch with the real deal.
Mhm. I agree, and that's why we don't. It's why I think the nature centers are good. You get out, but it takes a certain kind of person to be interested in nature. So how do you get somebody who's not interested in nature, but more very business oriented or making money or not interested in nature? How do you get somebody like that to start thinking more about nature? And that's a real challenge. And I don't have an answer for that, but that's along that same line. We're losing contact. Back in this time of the nature study movement, everybody wanted to know more about nature and natural history. There was all kinds of discoveries. Fossils were finally being discovered back then in the mid 1850s, and people were, wow, what's that all about? And that's where it started questioning the religion as well, because it doesn't always go along with what the Bible says. So people had a little trouble with that. But nature was getting more and more out there, more publications about it, and so more people are reading about it and getting excited about it. And then, as we said at the end of the presentation, the whole nature thing started fading away because of other interests, whether today technology. A lot of the kids are inside houses and doing their games on their screens and not going outside, and just other things going on all the time that nature, I think, gets put to the side. And I think most of you here, I know, are involved in nature, and you understand what good it can do for you mentally and physically. And so I think it's good. I just got to find more people to appreciate it. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you both. You started with the Greek and the Romans, and I just would like to acknowledge other cultures before them. So, for example, the Chinese, the Emperor Shennan, he wrote a book including 365 medicinal plants. One of them is a tea, and his discovery of the tea by accident was boiling water for bathing, and leaf from the tea tree fell there, and he noticed the color of the tea. Yesterday, and here we come, we have the tea. And then after that, actually, for example, also in Africa, Khalid, he gave us the coffee. And then also that came with an accident. He was like washing his goats, and when they came back one day, they were kind of, according to what he said, riskier than usual. And then actually they went to see what did they eat. The coffee.
The coffee, yeah.
They've gone to Starbucks.
You know, the coffee.
Yeah.
But also actually other, like the Hindu, they have their own nature study, the Arabs. So for example, if you notice the name Jabir ibn Hayyan, Jabir for algebra, introduced algebra. And there is the Razi and the Sina, those are medicine. They produce, well, they lay the foundation for medicine and other study astronomy. If you look at the alien plants and the Linnaeus book, some of those were in Arabic text.
Oh, okay.
Already.
Yeah.
And then if you go to the native, the Mayan and Aztecs, also they have their own and they introduce.
And that's why I kept it brief, because there's a lot of places to go. But I was thinking the same thing when I was doing it. Geez, this is all pretty much English white history, and so I'm sure there was others out there, but again, I wanted to try and keep it brief. But I'm glad you brought up that point, because that's not the only place where nature was being studied. Other cultures all around had to do the same thing. And as soon as man was roaming on the earth, they had to do something, wherever they were on the earth, they had to figure out how to live with nature and use it to their best. Yes. Yes.
Very interesting talk, Paul. Thank you. And I think what's interesting to me too is this idea that, infusing nature would make the kids better citizens. And we're almost at that same point, I think, of like what I hear from teachers in the schools is that there's much more emphasis on basics like reading and writing and math, like in the younger grades. And like, it makes you think could we make better global citizens if we incorporated more, stewardship and exposure to nature.
Yeah, the problem I have with teaching a lot of science in the schools is that they're always talking about things outside of the reach of the normal kid. They're talking about lions and tigers and elephants. These kids, unless they go to the zoo, like Tim took his class at the zoo this week, Kids don't see those things, and the whole idea with the nature study was that if you learn to identify a praying mantis in your backyard or a worm or whatever it is or a bird, you can see it and watch it and actually feel a real connection to it more than a polar bear that you only see pictures of, and we don't know anything else about it. They're endangered, okay, but what about your own? They believe that if you got involved with your own immediate nature, you would then start to expand, transcend out a little further and start accepting and looking into these other areas as well.
I think a lot of it we've done finances, as our field trip money dried up over the years. I know I got my classes here for almost 30 years. And every year I would have several kids that that was the best field trip we ever went on. But they were in sixth grade, so they had been, 6 years of trip. And they would say this was the best field trip they had been on. But it's field trip money dried up, and you can only take one trip a year. They're doing more things like just the zoo or whatever. So right here in our own backyard.
Yeah, it's this time when they were doing nature study, they had a lot of time. No other subjects they didn't have these core requirements that had to be testing and all that kind of stuff that was going on. Yeah. Yes.
So I'm Barb, and I taught here in teacher education for 35 years. And so I've really seen the pendulum swing in education. Back then in 1987 to 90, I had the absolute privilege of working with Suzanne Weber, whose background was science, and she came into education. And it was at the time where state ed was bringing in inquiry-oriented science education, new curriculum. And so we got a lot of state and federal flow-through money for 25 years and developed this project called Project Smart, which was to bring teachers in to co-design, first of all, to experience inquiry-oriented hands-on science. We were out here and all over this community. We rented a houseboat, and we're doing water samples, we had barn raisings, we went spelunking. We developed a Kids at Work side program where kids would go in and study what science and math was being used in places like Hammermill and the steam station and Birdseye and Nestle's and all around the community. And then, like you said, the funding dried up for the materials. We used to have kits out of OCs that teachers could sign out. They developed the units themselves for their kids and their communities with what's in their yard, what's available. And then the money for the kits disappeared, the money for the field trips disappeared, reading scores went down, and then the first thing to be knocked out is science and social studies. So
and right back to the
I
textbooks.
When I entered the profession, we were heading in the right direction, and hopefully the pendulum will swing back.
Yeah. Oh, it's sad to hear.
Yeah,
I went like that. Yeah. All right.
Kristen, you mentioned your comments that reminds me of a fabulous speaker a few months ago from the Aquasasne Freedom School, and nature study is not big, what you name it, but their kids spend a lot of time outside in intensive observation. So it's very similar.
It's nice if you can have the freedom to do that. Regular public schools are locked into certain times for their classes, and they got to move on. And so what they can be taught. I used to teach elementary education in Liverpool back in the early 80s. And I was teaching second grade, and I had all kinds of time. I mean, I had a curriculum I had to follow, but I wasn't locked into a lot of time. In fact, half of the day was all me and my kids, and do whatever we wanted to do. So that was nice. I also moved up to sixth grade and tried to implement nature study. I wasn't going to mention this, but I will now. And so the school I was at had a field and woods around it. So I'd take my sixth graders out to try and do nature study out in the woods. And as we're going down the hallway, of course, we have to walk by other classrooms. And these other teachers didn't like that because the kids are going, hey, why is he getting to go outside? My principal was totally for it, supported 100%. And then I had one teacher complain to the science department that I wasn't using the science book, sitting in the classroom I was using the science book, but I was using it outside. And so I was told that I couldn't go outside anymore and that somebody was going to sit with me for 3 days in my classroom to make sure I didn't go outside. And that, yeah, so that kind of put a quash on the whole thing for me at that point.
Yeah, I think that's part of what I was getting at earlier too, but the values and even the political nature and competition of values and power. Church and science never got along very well.
No.
And that isn't necessarily the way it ought to be.
No.
That you can't have different views. And sort of the degradation of and lack of paying attention to previous civilization
Mm-hmm.
and ways of living.
Yeah.
As was brought out there. So it's really a complicated human experience.
Yes, it is.
But on a positive note, there are preschools, especially out west and northwest, where the kids never go inside. And I have a friend's son or daughter who goes that same thing now, but they don't ever go outside. I mean, go inside. Everything is outside, even no matter what the weather is. And they do that in Finland, in
Yeah.
Scandinavian countries too. So just to be positive, it still sounds very depressing.
Yeah.
I thought it was good.
I mean,
Yeah.
science right now is,
But
it's hurting.
Yeah.
Politically, it's hurting.
Yeah,
And-
it's under attack,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
under attack.
that's why they can do it preschools, because they're not regulated.
Right.
Well, that's what's nice about these camps here. Like we run Exploring Nature, Beaver Lake runs it. Baltimore Woods, I was program director at Baltimore Woods for several years for their summer camps. And that basically we had about 400 acres of stream and woods and fields to run through. And we did kids anywhere from age 5 up to, I think it was 13. And they just loved running through the woods. If we'd have structure, we wanted to have structure or something to plan for them. Like today, we'll talk about butterflies. Talk about one butterfly and now they're out running around, but then later they'll come back and say, hey, did you see that butterfly? And so they just enjoy being out in nature and really like it.
Can I do a plug right now for Sterling Nature Center?
Sure.
Second Saturday of the month from 10 to 11:30. I run a kids program, so
Okay.
it's for K through 6.
Yeah.
It's limited to 10 or 15 families.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, 5 or 6 families will sign up and only 2 show up
Yeah.
almost every time. But there's also a woman who's running a homeschool program, trying to get that underway for science. And this summer, they're hoping to do a camp.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
the new building is gorgeous if you haven't been out there.
I have. It's wonderful. Yeah. No, it's Mel.
Just talking about those schools, actually, when we visited Calcutta in India, representing Singapore, and Tagore, who got a Nobel Prize 1945, something like that. He has a school there. All classes were taught outside and the trees.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I plug the camps because the kids, they don't have any cell phones or anything and they just really enjoy being outside and they discover all kinds of things. I mean, it's kind of life I lived as a kid growing up. I had freedom to run anywhere I wanted all the time, and I had fields and woods, and I just loved it. And I think that's what got me interested.
Also, a friend of mine teaches in Colorado at-risk kids, and it's sort of like an outward bound kind of
Yes.
program, and being outside is like the best thing for at-risk kids.
Yes. Okay, anything else? So now I'll tell you what the whole purpose of the name tag was. I wanted people to put on a name tag because I wanted to try and have a little social, not hour, but a little social minute or two. And so on the name tag should be your name and interest in nature that you have. All right, if you don't have a name tag, the person can still come up to you and say, hi, my name is Mary. What are you interested in nature? I don't see you have anything, so you must be interested in everything. So can you tell me about something? All right, so we have refreshments over here. I'm going to put up a little slideshow in the meantime. So please get up.